question I think should be asked. Should we let Formula 2 champions return? Because I think, if you want to make a NASCAR comparison, I would tell you, Daniel Suarez won an Xfinity championship. He was expecting to come back to the Xfinity Series to defend that title. Obviously, Carl Edwards retired very abruptly, and he was kind of the heir apparent there right in line at JGR to replace him. But a lot of people thought, maybe he was promoted a year sooner than he should have been. He probably would have made more sense for him to come in 2018 rather than 2017 like he did. But if NASCAR had this same rule, that's what Gibbs would have had to do, or they would have lost him in free agency as opposed to a rival team. Should Formula 2 or Formula 1, the FIA, whoever, say, look, we understand there's a limited number of seats, as Kane's Cat Heat 305 mentioned, you only have 20 seats in Formula 1. Should we let perhaps Felipe Drugovich come back and defend his title? I know Theo Porcher's been in F2 for 3 years, but if there's no other option, is a fourth year what's best for him? And if he defends his championship, well, then there's really no excuse for F1 teams not to give him a call.
I mean, I would say that's where the devil is in the details when it comes to making such a rule. If you allow the Formula 2 driver to come back, they win the championship, there should be something where it's like, okay, they're going to be in a team racing driver capacity, I would feel, not a testing role or something. Now, of course, the teams in F1, they'll say, oh, we don't like that because we have our own deals. But one of the things we talked about yesterday, when you look at all the F1 drivers and all the winners in F1, out of the active drivers, of course, Lewis Hamilton's number one. Then you have Max Verstappen at 50-plus wins. You have to go all the way down third, Bottas with 10 wins. Everybody else single digits. We're not missing out on drivers that are winning races and, okay, give up your seat. Like Lance Stroll, he's been there for a while, hasn't won a race. We know a lot of people want Drugovich in that car. You look at Williams, Logan Sargent, I know he just completed his first season. I think a lot of folks will make the case he should deserve a second season, be in there. Haas, 2 drivers, been there a long time, no wins. In the case of Hulkenberg, no podiums. Should we have it where those drivers are then systematically replaced as we have Formula 2 champions coming up? I think that is something worth discussing, some sort of process. And if you're not going to have that, have it where, okay, you could do 2 years, maybe a third year max in Formula 2. But make it where it's like if you do get 2 consecutive Formula 2 championships, you get a racing seat. If for some reason you don't defend your second Formula 2 championship, you can come back a third year and try 2 out of 3. But overall, I don't see the big harm in it. I know you have bigger fields in Formula 2. Formula 3 has huge fields, considering they're at the same tracks as Formula 1. I don't see why it can't be done. It's just a matter of getting the teams together, all of them from Formula 2, Formula 3, Formula 1, all the stakeholders involved, making the deal. The details is where it's just going to be really hard to make such a rule. But I, for one, believe there should be some sort of change because there's a lot of folks I think that are starting to get tired of the call. It's the 20 greatest drivers in the world. But you got question marks of, does this driver really need to be here in the F1 grid?
Yeah, well, I remember on this very show, and in fact, this very episode of this very show last year when we were wrapping up Abu Dhabi, I made the case for Felipe Drugovich, and I said, look, he's going to be the reserve at Aston Martin or the development driver at Aston Martin, and that's great. You get a little bit of experience, a little bit of seat time, a little bit of time in the sim and everything. But, Fernando Alonso is in his early 40s. That's very, very old for a Formula 1 driver. Is he kind of taking that seat away from the next in line, if you will, like a Felipe Drugovich who's proven himself in Formula 2 and won a championship fairly handily? And obviously, I think Alonso made me eat crow this year with how well he performed. I think now I would say, well, Lance Stroll probably would be the first to go from that seat. But of course, that gets complicated because his dad's major part of the ownership over at Aston Martin. But I think that this is part of why it's so frustrating, to Kane's Cat Heats 305's points here. Thank you for being so active in the chat tonight, by the way. Formula 3, you have 10 cars or 10 teams, 3 cars per team. F2 bumps up to 11. And then if Andretti joins, it would be 12 teams in F2, 11 teams in F3. They said they would join those series as well. And then you have 11 teams in Formula 1 as well. So that would be an extra 2 seats for young drivers to come up through the ranks. And maybe this problem would be alleviated a little bit like that. But, I think that's part of why I'm so frustrated by the opposition, because we had a situation last year where Colton Herta wanted to be in Formula One, and obviously he would kind of be who Andretti would want to bring. But then you have the super license issue that also complicates things. But, if he takes one of the AlphaTauri seats, then that kicks somebody else out. I mean, I feel like even though you have the Mazepins of the world and drivers who you say, like, should they really be, are they really F1 material? Even with that, I think you have probably a good 22, 24 drivers who you say, Mick Schumacher, for example. I know he, crashed a lot of cars and, maybe didn't take as much of a step forward in year 2 as people would have liked to see. But, I'm sure he's got to be very frustrated being stuck in a Mercedes reserve role. And I think, most drivers need 2 or 3 years before we can really judge where they're going to be. That's why I hope Logan Sargent comes back next year. I think it would be a shame if he gets shuffled out. I really did not like how Red Bull and AlphaTauri treated Nick de Vries. I thought he didn't get nearly enough time. I thought he was very, very strong in the one start he had with Williams in 22. So I think that the ladder system definitely needs to be looked at because, Joe, to your point, you have a guy like Mazepin finish 5th in Formula 2 and he gets promoted to Formula 1. Logan Sargent last year, he finished 4th in the standings. I'm not saying he shouldn't have been promoted at Williams' seat, but what kind of look is it that he gets an F1 seat, but a champion doesn't? If you want to talk about the last American in Formula 1, Alexander Rossi was 2nd in what was at the time GP2 standings in 2015. Rio Harriento ended up finishing 4th, and Harriento gets the Manor seat over Rossi. So, there's even direct competition there for the one seat that we have left. I just think that when you have the optics of that for F1 and the optics for the FIA are just not good. When you have your champions who are supposedly the best of those trying to get in on the last step before you hit the top of the ladder, and there's no seat for them, I don't think you can make a very strong case that the ladder system works.
One thing, since you bring up Andretti, and we know the saga going on between Andretti, the F1 teams, you mentioned they're going to have for Formula 2, Formula 3 teams. The way the teams in F1 are acting, especially since they have the Concord agreement, it's almost like we're franchises, but they're not really. The FIA could still, say, hey, we want this new team in there, and the F1 teams supposedly will vote on that. If the teams are acting such like a franchise, that's why I believe the FIA should say, okay, but if you finish last in the constructors, you have to give at least one seat up to the F2 champion. This year, that would have been, I believe, Haas F1 that got last. Nico Hülkenberg, yeah, he's a good driver, but he's never got on podium. That Haas team only 10 or 12 points. I think that's a good room for saying, hey, we need something in place because at the end of the day, yeah, I know Hülkenberg has the fans out there, especially in Germany, but is he really adding value to Formula 1, to Haas, when you could have a young driver that come in, they're off the Formula 2 championship, some hype around him. Yeah, I know once they get in the car and things don't go great, well, it's going to not go that great, but something new and different because Hülkenberg has been racing quite a long time. One of the things, too, when you brought up about a driver sitting out a season coming back, Esteban Ocon, he sat out, I believe it was 2019, where he was originally with Racing Point, had some good moments here and there, sat out with Mercedes, lands a ride at Alpine. I think we can all say he's done quite good at Alpine since then. But just to have this norm of, okay, you're the champion, well, best of luck to you. You got to the top of the ladder. Will anybody pick you up from there, or are you just stuck there? Is really frustrating.
Yeah, well, that's a good point, bringing up Ocon as well. And, Kane's Cat seat 305, Mick does not deserve a spot. I don't know. I feel like I disagree with that. I think Mick really, when you look at his F3 and F2 rise up the ladder, it was always the second season where he, won his F3 championship, and then second season F2 he won the championship, and second season F1 he picked up some points. But you got to remember, it's not like you're going to win a championship and keep that trend going in a Haas. I don't know at the same time. Again, I know he, was known for being a little bit accident prone, even in his second year as well. But I just think, and again, we have this problem in NASCAR as well. Are we too quick to judge guys who are in some cases literal teenagers or early 20 somethings. This is not an easy job. Driving a race car at the top echelon of motorsports is no easy feat. And not everybody's going to be a Max Verstappen. That's what makes the Max Verstappens or the Lewis Hamiltons of the world so incomprehensibly great. It's like, how are you doing this? How are you winning a champion? How are you winning a race at 18? How are you almost winning a championship as a rookie with McLaren in Lewis's case? Very few people can do that. And it's what separates the great drivers from the elite drivers, the ones that are in the GOAT conversation, if you will. I feel like there are so many young drivers that deserve an opportunity here. And particularly, you look at who wins our championships, you would say, okay, that's the best of this crop here. Why is there no seat available for them? This is the third year in a row now. I mean, Mick's the last, correct me if I'm wrong, the last F2 champion that got an F1 seat the next year, right? Piastri had to wait a year, and thinking back to some earlier champions, I think Gasly had to wait a year. He had to go do Super Formula before he got the Toro Rosso seat. It's not a new problem, but it's a problem nonetheless. And I think that it's something that we really need to look at. Having an extra team would help. Having an extra couple teams would help. I know Andretti wasn't the only one that submitted an application, so that's a whole rabbit hole we can go down and be here for another hour. I don't know if we need to do that here tonight, but I think there's a lot to consider when it comes to how we go about trying to fill the grid out. Obviously, money's always going to be a major talking point, but at the same time, almost everybody's a pay driver in some sense nowadays. You can't get to this level if you don't have sponsorship. Obviously, a lot of drivers have more sponsorship and funding than others, but I don't know. I think it's going to be very interesting, and I think just to bring it all back and answer the question here that we started this segment with, if this is going to be the norm, if this is going to be the pattern, then if there's no open ideally, yes, of course, there's an open F1 seat. That clearly hasn't been the case the last few years. So if you're a Theo Portier or Felipe Drugovich, obviously there's IndyCar, there's Super Formula, there's other open wheel series out there, but nothing gives you, obviously all the F1 teams, their eyes are directly on F2 because there are support series. I feel like winning a championship should not prevent you from coming back and defending that championship if you can't get an F1 seat.